All right, Victorum Gaming fans and Victory at Sea fans, we're back, and this is our third video in our trilogy here to wrap up, we'll finish talking about and then wrapping up deployment and basically winning or losing in the game. So we've taken a look at just some basic concepts like victory points and tactical withdrawals. Then we've looked at the objectives or missions, however you want to define those for the game. And then we're going to actually take a look at deployment today, scouting, and then some ideas for competitive battles that the game also has. So starting off with deployment. So basically once some of the preliminary things are chosen, both players roll a d10. And then the lowest rolling player will have to deploy their fleet first in one deployment zone, followed by their opponent. So, again, another key role that you probably want to win right off the bat. So, again, anytime you kind of have to lay all your cards on the table, that gives the opponent more of an idea of what your fleet is composed of and your plans, and maybe depending on any like terrain features, anything like that you might be running, assuming it's not just a big old open map, where they can best deploy to sort of counter what you've done. So then one of the key features, which will be in, I think, just one of the greatest parts of the game here, is the scouting phase, or sort of pre-phase to the game here. And scouting will actually do a number of great things for you. So there are some benefits as far as basically like immediate in-game benefits, but also will help you with things like being able to deal with offshore, or not offshore, but off-map assets like an aircraft carrier, things like that. But scouting can also modify your deployment zone and other things like that. So it's just a whole nother level to the game, which is really great and fascinating, and just will require some extra thinking too. So it's never really just going to be a game of just put all your stuff on the table, and your opponent does the same, and then start moving models across the board. So there's definitely some actual thinking that will have to go on for this. So anyway, scouting. So when the enemy is known to be in the area, fleets will expend a great deal of effort in reconnaissance. If one fleet can outscout the other, it stands to gain a great advantage before the battle even begins. And as you'll see as we cover through this here, yes, scouting is definitely going to be important. Really, you should at a minimum try to accomplish a little bit of scouting, and it'll make more sense when we talk about the scouting table, as you see what benefits you get from scouting. So, if you just completely ignore scouting, I mean, yes, you'll start with, all your ships and stuff on the table, but on the other hand, some of the advantages that your opponent might be able to get against you are they might not seem like a big deal immediately, but certainly as the game wears on, those will just become more telling. But again, it'll make more sense when we take a look at the table here in just a few minutes. Both players should secretly remove all destroyers and cruisers they intend to use for scouting from their fleet before deployment, and put them to one side. In addition, they should assign which observation flights will be used for scouting as well. These ships and aircraft committed to scouting are not deployed with the rest of the fleet. Instead, the ships may return from scouting at some point during the battle. So the ships will, but the planes will not, at least as it's written here. And then in every end phase, both players roll a d6 for every destroyer and cruiser they've committed to scouting. On a roll of 6, the ship is returned to the fleet and may join the battle. It'll move on from any point along a random edge, and we'll see that here when we take a look at the next page, which is really interesting too. Can definitely lead for some interesting surprises at various points in the game. So you should kind of always play with the idea that anything that the opponent doesn't have on the table may show up in your initial deployment zone. So you can't really sort of hang back with ships and necessarily think that they're going to be 100% safe. So it does, to sort of use like a video game term, you can't really be necessarily camping in one spot with certain ships. You may, in fact, want to move them, at least get them away from table edges. So anyway, then, before the first turn of the game, both players reveal the ships and aircraft that they've used for scouting. And then for every ship and aircraft listed below used for scouting, the player will roll a d6. So we have destroyers, cruisers, and observation flights. And then every basically dice that rolls a 5 or 6 will earn the player's fleet a scouting point. When all dice have been rolled, each player should total their scouting points and compare them to the scouting table. And as we'll see on the scouting table, there's no point in just scouting with one thing. Basically, it's a minimum of 2 successes with this roll to even get a scouting point that makes that you can use for anything. So uh, at a minimum, if you have access to observation flights, you should put one up, if nothing else for the role. But again, if like an enemy has a carrier that will be like deployed over the horizon, certainly like observation flights will be important too. But yeah, so, and as you'll see, again, these benefits from scouting will basically stack on top of each other. But to get to some of the sort of juicier bonuses, you really do have to commit a good chunk of your fleet to that. And the nice thing with that too, which may not seem immediately obvious, is because there is such an incentive to do some scouting with your fleet. It's I don't imagine we'll see something like really like any kind of like alpha striking in this game where you kind of just you got the first turn and then you just like wipe the opponent out more or less because they didn't uh, you know uh, didn't deploy so much. So like if you keep all your stuff on but you didn't scout and then the opponent commits a big chunk of their fleet to scouting, yeah, they might not have a lot on the board right now, but again, these benefits that they will have over you as the game wears on will definitely you'll be missing those if you didn't do some scouting. And again, that's not to say that any of this is guaranteed either, which is nice. So it's not just kind of like a no-brainer to scout with a certain amount of things, because again, you still have to roll for it, and you might not actually get any, which would any scout points, which would suck, of course, if you committed a whole lot of assets to that and then got nothing for it. But that's the gamble. So like I said, that really leads to an interesting decision making process at the start of the games. And then pretty much every mission in the game is going to be 8 turns. If you it might seem like a lot of other games go to like turn 5 or 6, but this should play fairly quickly. And especially, again, in our other video where we talked about how damage accrues, especially with crits and stuff like that, damage can quickly get out of control. So even ships with a big chunk of hull points might seem like, oh, they'll never be sunk, but you'd be surprised. So anyway, moving on. So the scouting table. So as you can see here, the reasons why you should be doing some scouting. So it takes at least 2 points or more. And if you have that, you get to add 1 to your initiative roll for the entire battle. So that right there should already be enough incentive for you to commit some solid assets to getting that. Again, if you have that over your opponent, winning initiative is awesome in this game. We've covered that in various other videos. So, there's all the benefits of that. Check out the other videos that we've covered. Again, good stuff there. Now, the next level up takes a big, it's 4 or more, and then it's as above. All these stack, which is great, but any carriers may be placed into deep deployment. So if you want to even put your carriers into that over the horizon, kind of like deep deployment, you're going to have to commit some solid assets to scouting just to be able to have enough points to do that. So that right there already forces some thinking in fleets that are going to be running carriers. Then moving on, 7 or more. So again, that's a lot of 5s and 6s to get, but as above and may immediately redeploy any number of ships, including scouts, in enhanced deployment zone. We'll take a look at that in the next page. While carriers may start with half their flights in the air. Again, right there, when we covered carriers, you can launch or recover 1 per turn, 1 flight. Even with an order, it's 2 per turn. Here, you get to start with half your flights in the air. We still don't know like how many flights a carrier might have, but let's just say, a carrier has 10 flights. All right, you got to start with 5 of them already in the air. That's basically 5 turns of launching planes right there. So just think about how much time that will save you as far as like activations that you would be using to do this as opposed to potentially doing other things. If they're already in the air, that means they can go and do what they need to do, whether they're fighters, bombers, etc. You're not wasting time getting them up in the air and maybe building a critical mass of planes in the air. So again, huge if you're running carriers, for example. 8 or more, so just 1 more, as above, and add a further 1, so for a total of 2 to your initiative roll for the entire battle. So another just, again, awesome ability. I would, if you have that +2 for the whole battle, again, you just have so much of a leg up on your opponent. And even if you've both done the scouting, they have the +1, but you still get that extra +1, you're still going to be up on them there. But again, let's say they didn't even get enough to get +1 to their initiative. Yes, you could theoretically still lose some rolls, If you rolled a 1, obviously you'd roll a 3 then. So if they rolled a 4, 5, or 6, they'd beat you. So, I mean, yeah, there's some times where you still might lose initiative, but just having that kind of cushion there for even like if you're just getting average rolls like a 3, they're going to have to roll a 6 to beat you to get initiative. So I like those odds. And then the final one, 10 or more points. This one's going to definitely require some serious commitment to scouting. But as above, and may immediately redeploy any number of ships, including scouts in superior deployment zone. We'll see that in the next page here in a second. While carriers can start with all their flights in the air. So again, just think of the activations that would save you per carrier. Again, we still don't know the numbers that a carrier might have, but let's just say 10 flights again. That's 10 flights in the air as opposed to trying to get all 10. Well, if it's an 8-turn game, obviously you couldn't get them up if it's just 1 per turn. So you'd have to be passing or committing your orders to getting 2 up in a turn, and you might need orders to do other things. So that's just huge. So you really can't sort of emphasize the importance enough of scouting and what that can do for you in the game. So just another level of things to think about. And then how do you actually win the game then? So again, we've covered scenarios in the previous video. So here the battle ends after 8 turns, and or if a fleet is completely destroyed or makes a tactical withdrawal. And then at that point, you basically compare objectives and see who succeeded. So a player with a major victory obviously beats someone with a minor, and a minor will beat someone with no victory at all. Anything else is a draw. So again, and considering how asymmetrical some of those matchups can be, that will lead to some interesting moments here. Again, definitely got to see this in practice first with some full games, but of course, we got to have the game actually released to do that. And then they even included a little bit, which is nice, with competitive battles in mind, so more like a tournament or something like that. So they've kind of put in some suggestions as far as like good matchups to have from that list of scenarios. So again, definitely ones that we need to try out and see how these all work in practice. But I like that they thought of the competitive battles there for events and stuff like that. So then let's go back and take a look at the actual deployment zone. So the typical deployment zone, basically 3 feet apart and tucked in a little bit from the table edges. That's that regular or normal deployment. Now, if you've done a little bit of scouting, here's your first upgrade, basically. You get to deploy across the entire width of the table, the long edge. Still 36 inches apart, no big deal, but basically 6 inches in if you're playing a 4-foot table, for those who haven't figured that out. But yeah, just, comparing the two here, so you're already adding just space to your deployment zone, giving yourself more options. And then the final upgrade to deployment zones is what they call the superior deployment. So wouldn't you like to start with your ships? Let me see if I can get my finger in the shot here. Wouldn't you like to start potentially halfway up the board here? That would seem cool if you can get that for your scouting efforts. So that will lead to some very interesting choices. Like if you have superior deployment and they just have normal, they're kind of tucked in here. You can definitely work on flanking them and stuff like that. And then a lot of your things that will be returning can basically return from any board edge. So it's not set in stone which edge that is, but wouldn't you like to get more stuff in on the flanks or even from behind them? Speaking of which, returning ships, it is randomized. So you really don't want to roll a 6 here because you're just coming in off your own edge, which maybe in some scenarios, yes, but ideally coming in off the flanks will be good, and obviously it'll be one or the other there, so that'll be the biggest chance. But really, I think in a lot of cases, rolling a 5 would be the sweet spot, because just showing up behind the enemy with destroyers and cruisers and stuff like that is going to be nasty, especially if they've maybe committed some weaker ships to the back there, or let's say they for whatever reason they didn't put their carrier in deep deployment. The carrier's kind of hovering around in the back edge here. You rock on with a couple of like heavy cruisers. Well, that carrier's going to be dead sooner rather than later, especially with, again, some of the nastier things that we've seen so far, like the Japanese heavy cruisers can certainly dish out some punishment between guns and torps. So yeah, just lots and lots of interesting little ideas and tidbits here to think about and digest. And hopefully, again, once we get some full games, obviously with full models released, that'll be some interesting experience to gain here and see what actually works and maybe doesn't work. Again, a lot of this is still just sort of on paper and theory right now, but definitely looking forward to testing all this stuff out in some actual games of Victory at Sea. So hope you guys enjoyed that video. If you could, give us a like and a subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you in the next one.